So we have Jason Petersen here today. He is the owner of GenR8 Marketing.
Correct.
Um, from what I could tell on your LinkedIn profile, you've been in marketing for a lot of years, lots of experience with that. So Jason wanted to come and share that expertise with us and really just tell us about your journey, your entrepreneurial journey, and share that wisdom with us.
Sure. Well, wisdom, I suppose, is just, again, sharing with you guys of, again, mistakes I've made and things that have worked, and kind of how I'm still have a business, and we're still, live and kicking. So I guess my origin story, I suppose, again, having my family here, I come from a family of many small business owners. My parents both grew up on farms, but as you can see, my mother had a piano teaching business. My father at one point did software consulting and software development as his own business. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, all had businesses. So I guess for me, although I was born and raised in Lincoln, grew up here and everything, I always had this, I guess, ownership mentality dynamic that was around. I mean, I always say, like, there is something about people from small towns and from farms where it's not a braggadocious kind of thing. You put your head down, you work hard, but you own it. I think for me, that was kind of one of the things I took away when I was growing up as a kid is she didn't make excuses. Responsibility was just kind of a given. And so when people needed to step up, that's what you did. So I think for me, I never necessarily desired nor wanted, I think, kind of the limelight. I didn't want that, but I guess for me, I always felt compelled that if somebody needed help, if there was a leadership required, I would, step into the role if it was something that I could do. So again, for me, I never planned on being an owner. That was not even on my radar. I completely was, for me, which is kind of, I think, the funny thing, not everybody has this, but I kind of knew what I was going to do when I was 5. I didn't know I was going to be an owner. But as I shared, my dad's a software engineer, IT person. My mom's a piano teacher. And then my grandmother was a painter. So I'm an art major. I'm an art tech hybrid is the way I describe me. I don't fit. So I guess as a result of that, I always knew I wanted to somehow be in art and somehow do something with computers. So even though I'm 46 years old, I joke that, like, literally Dad got our first computer when I was 5. So I was right at the seat of the table of watching the technology change. On the flip side, then I was drawing and painting and doodling and just doing all kinds of stuff. So there was this, and then I was in music a lot. I sang. Of course, I took piano from my mother. So there were the arts, and technology was this constant complementary skill set that was being cultivated as I was growing up. That just kind of, again, I kind of fell into my lap, and a lot of it had to do with my family. So when I got into college, I think, at that point, would be in the 90s. I was like, I want to be a graphic designer. I mean, that was kind of the idea. And that was kind of my choice and my discipline. And I was going to the art college. So kind of I was taking more of an angle from the art side, which was great, But what really changed everything and got me jump-started into where I am today is the summer after my freshman year, and this will be one of, I think, the advice that I share, and anybody that watches this video is, I started a job at student involvement, which was in the university for a lot of the student organization for like activities and stuff, as a graphic designer in their department. And they had young students that would work part-time. So all of a sudden, as a barely 19-year-old kid, now I'm doing work for actual clients in which I have responsibilities, attention to detail, proofing. Of course, you're dealing with printers. So all of those dynamics that you would deal with when you're out of school, I got into it right away. I made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So again, I think, as I shared with how my family worked in those dynamics, is like, well, yeah, okay, now I'm in a role where I'm responsible. I mean, I had jobs when I was in high school, but it's like, okay, well, you do a good job, this idea of missing little small things in graphic design and that discipline. Detail is everything. A misspelling here, a pixel wrong here. So the other big sort of serendipitous thing that occurred was the internet. So all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this occurs, starts to happened when I was in high school and as in college. Now, they need a website. And of course, this is far ahead and more advanced than what I was doing in design school. But I met a gentleman at the time that we started freelancing and doing websites and website design. So like I said, I was doing three things then. At roughly when I turned 20, so I'd already worked there for almost a year. I was basically at a small business at 20 years old with another gentleman called Graphically Speaking, where we were freelancing websites, some graphic design, logos. And then I was working at student involvement. And then, of course, now it continues to evolve. Well, now I'm doing websites. And then I'm going to school. And I always tell people, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I never felt too busy. Maybe it was just I knew how to block my time, or just I was efficient, but I was doing what I loved. And it was, I just remember when I got my first computer that I designed, it was a Power Mac 8600. And I remember dealing with Photoshop and like, I felt like I was a kid in a candy store, because all of a sudden growing up, I was fascinated with the digital design. Now I could do it. I could do whatever I want. I remember like staying up all night just because I thought it was amazing. So needless to say, my entrepreneurial journey officially starts then when we're doing this freelance stuff. And again, I ended up throughout my entire college career, worked there. I ended up also working in Teachers College as a graphic designer at their design center. And then I was freelancing. And then we had this little business that we had for about 2.5 years. Then he ended up graduating and I continued it. So now, like I said, I'm Graphically Speaking, I'm doing my thing. And then in an entrepreneurship class, honors seminar thing at CBA, my senior year, I met a gentleman that was 2 years younger than me, and we started a business. And it was a digital agency called Agelon. That's what we named it. So we started it my senior year. We created a business plan, and it was going to focus majority around website development and website design. And again, snotty-nosed kid, I'm just, all, excited and exuberant, and it's amazing. And so like I tell people, when I graduated from college, what's hilarious is I actually stayed in a small studio apartment by the SCC campus up at 84th and O. That was and it was just an itty-bitty thing. And school was done and I started working in the house or my little apartment. So I didn't go anywhere. That was my job. And it was, and again, I think when I got into that, then it was like, oh my gosh, now it's real, right? Yeah, it was a little playtime somewhat when you're in college and, it's fun. And now all of a sudden now we've got to, be a grown-up and pay rent, do all that stuff. And so at that point, I think this is where I was fortunate to have my dad around. Is because of my tech, some of my very first marketing clients were ones that I did tech support on their computers. And a lot of that because that's what I was around. I mean, to this day, I like to build and tear apart computers. I still like to do drawing and painting. But again, because of my influence on my dad, when we were poor as dirt, I'd go and take care of, and again, I think the consistent attitude for me is, and this is maybe even my personality profile as an Enneagram, is I'm a helper. So like for me, my flower garden is if I feel like I'm helping someone, if I'm actually doing something that has merit, man, then I'm happy. So for me, no, I wasn't a, software engineer, IT guy, but you know what? I wanted to help. Well, those 2 or 3 initial relationships became one client I've had for 25 years. And over time, he's like, I'm like, hey, you need help? Sure, I can help with this. I can help with this. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, I honestly, like my main wheelhouse is website design and development. So I took over that. And even to this day, he's still a client of mine. He's about ready to retire. He's a cosmetic dentist in Omaha. So I guess, to kind of fast forward a little bit, as I had Agelon, we're doing this now. We have this itty bitty tiny little office off of an office. And we're getting websites and we're doing this. The one small thing I want to say that kind of was a huge part of this, what allowed me to sell my first company. So basically this agency, Agelon, I had for 10 years. So right away when I started, one of the most annoying things, because I did do a little bit of programming. I wasn't like hardcore, but I would, get into the code. But this gentleman that was with me was a genius. Well, we thought it was really silly that a layman person couldn't update a website. Well, this day and age, that's pretty common. Wix, Squarespace, we use WordPress as our platform at GenR8, but then that wasn't the case. If you wanted to update a website, you had to contact someone that was a tech. So my partner and I at the time, in 2000, began the development of what was called a software as a service and web application, which we didn't even call it that then, called Gravel. And it basically was a web-based content management, which allowed us and my clients to update their website without coming to us. And we charged an annual fee. So, I mean, now it'd be monthly, but it was way before that software as a service model. But again, a lot of it to my dad's credit, and then to one gentleman who dad worked for him as a CTO. I worked from Glenn Frent, who had an ad agency and also a dental software company. I got mentors like, you know what, you need to charge recurring for that. Okay, so now I have my build a website, and then we're building this, software product that allows us to efficiently build sites 2, 3, 4 times faster than most people. So the margins were great, right? But again, it goes back to that idea, help. I'm helping someone because I think, the way I'm wound is, I'd say I'm a coach now. I coach track and cross country at middle school where my son and daughter go. I loved taking really complicated things and trying to put it into like a Reader's Digest, like, hey, let's put this in plain English, right? And so that's all. What was happening is that I was doing training sessions and I was teaching all these people how to update their site, and they'd get so excited because, they didn't have to program, and they just thought it blew their mind. So I mention that because on the one hand, it was amazing, but it was very complicated because as you'll learn about marketing, one of the tenets of marketing is you don't want to create brand confusion. If everybody within about 10 seconds needs to know what you do, and I will even share how this changed for GenR8, because we changed our name in this iteration about 6, 7 years ago. But at that time, we didn't know what to think. Are we a software company? Are we a marketing firm or a website? And that was like a constant tug and pull. I think, the thing I will share is, in my career I counted it last night. If you count my first one, I've had 5 companies altogether. 2 primarily that I had for a long period of time, and one other one that I was kind of a minority partner in. But I think that having partners is very much like being married. And so you got to know what you're getting into. And again, I would say this is where like this notion, and I think one of the things I try to teach now who I deal with entrepreneurs is ask for advice. Those people that have had partners, that have had businesses, oh my gosh, ask them questions. You need to be finding out from them, how did they do it? So I've often thought, and when I've told my story, is why in the world would someone trust me to build a comprehensive software product when I was 21 years old? Well, I think I go back to how I was raised, which was, I'm an old soul. My grandfather happens to be still alive, and I just adored the guy. I loved my grandmother. So I grew up talking to adults, listening, asking questions, trying to learn from my elders. John is a perfect example of that. So that was in my DNA. So when I was young, I always say, if I'd say someone goes into sales or business development, it's like, if you want to create credibility, don't make the meeting about you. Make it about them. So I would be just like, hey, you want to go to coffee? Like, how'd you do this? And I would just come and I just pick their brain. Trevor hears me say this to my daughter. I say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And yes, I do talk, but in my life now, I do all these video interviews. I do tons and tons and tons of interviews with people. Well, it started at that point where I was asking questions. So to me, there is no way I'm sitting here without the hundreds of people that mentored me. And it began with my family, it began with my grandparents, and then it just continued to where I'm just like, wow. So every time I would sit down with someone and they were evaluating if they were going to work with me, when I was extremely young, I showed respect. And by being, and I guess I say that student of the game, by demonstrating that like, hey, yes, I want to be an owner, but I want to survive. How do you do that? You know, I look at my mother, who never advertised once, had a piano teaching business for 45 years. She fluctuated how many students she had based on how much money she wanted to make. She was her own manager, and she always had a waiting list. I mean, that was awesome. So like, holy cow. So I mean, just watching how had a seat at the table of seeing how people operated. But ultimately, for me, in those early years, I had to, you know, demonstrate a willingness to learn from my clients that I served. And because of that attitude, then I built trust. And then the other part of it was, which is something my dad would always say, is if you don't know something, be honest, but then go find the answer. So my thing, as you can imagine, I have been sitting in this constant flux of change that has been exponential in marketing, which is, you know, right now technology in that intersection is fully integrated now. Is that when somebody would say, hey, Jay, what do you think of that? Like, what? How would I? And I'd be like, I don't know, which I'd be honest, but I'd say, gosh darn, I'll go find it out for you. I'll go seek. My kids probably know that I do that to them sometimes. But that's what my dad did. It was like, hey, if you don't know something, go seek it. I'm not going to spoon feed you. Go do it. So I think the other part of my DNA, I said I was a helper, is I love to solve problems. I absolutely love the thrill of the grind, not even just the results, but the actual process of that tussle. Gosh, I can't figure it out. And as a result of that, again, not really realizing how this would help me, you know, like I go back where I built Legos, I did models, I would deal with computers. I just loved this, you know, I would say like, I like practice more than the game is maybe the way I would say it. The game is fun, but the practice, man, it's that like, and then that feeling of when you get over the hump. So it was stamina, endurance. You know, like there's a term I use a lot with my creatives who I manage now, I will share, they are the greatest group of ladies that I've ever had in my lifetime. They're in their 20s and they are just phenomenal. But there's a term that I coach and mentor creatives on, which is called creative fatigue, meaning that when you're all enthusiastic and you got that logo going and the design and that website and you're just pumped as heck and you got to go through 25 revisions. Well, guess what? When you're in that last leg of the race, oh my gosh, are you tired? You're annoyed. You're not having fun. You get fatigued. You start missing stuff. I mean, it's like running. All of a sudden, you're on the struggle bus. And, you know, there's a term I use now in my business, which now I use in my coaching, is finish strong. You got to tighten the screws, man, when you're down on that last leg. So on the creative side, and this is, I think, what websites started to introduce was detail, like detail you don't see. Now it's not just pixels and font. Now we're talking about code, which the client has no idea that even exists. So for me, it was this relentless pursuit of, hey man, when it gets harder, I'm a grinder. So I wanted to keep going and going and going, because for me, then it was that ability to solve it, to come to that conclusion. So again, I say to people, when I'm trying to hire someone, the tenets of an employee that will work anywhere is one that has an attention to detail, you know, someone that owns it, and that they're going to see things as you as a manager you can't see. And then the other is problem solving. If you're in an industry that's constantly in flux, which ours most definitely is, it's ridiculous. You would make your head spin to hear how Google has changed over the course of my career. It's insane. So you have to have people that are comfortable with change and enjoy that tussle. Now, that doesn't mean it isn't hard, of course. I mean, when Caitlin is editing videos and we've gone through the 35th revision on these little ones and we've redone stuff, yeah, that's annoying. But it is the industry. It is the nature of the beast. You know, if you're creating a program, it's the same idea. The software industry, which is, again, I think I learned this through my dad, was that stuff is part of it. So those sort of principles I applied to, well, you know what? That's how the software industry works. You got to be able to grind. So when I started to realize that, I think I got better at mentoring and teaching my team that, hey man, I feel you, I validate, I get it. Like, I get tired too, but we just got to keep at it. So then it was more of the enthusiast. instead of being, which I think is always the ownership pitfall, is by nature, owners are always typically good at the quality of what they do. That's never the issue, but the other issue, which is numbers, most owners don't necessarily come out of the gate good at finance. I certainly was not that way, but now, whatever, I'm better at that due through coaching and mentoring. But you ultimately, as an owner, when I work with them now, it's like they're the master of their craft. Okay, now when I bring that first employee in, well, guess what they do? They micromanage. They're like, oh, you got to do this. Oh, you're not doing it the way I do. And it would just frustrate you as owner, me in my first business. Why don't they think like I do? Well, of course they don't think like I do. They're not an owner. So owners have to have patience. They have to recognize that their DNA is completely different. We are an odd duck, because we're dealing with risk. We're dealing with volatility. We're trying to balance this glass half full, half empty. We have to be in the solutions business. We can't panic. And the reality is most people don't want to deal with that, right? And to be honest with you, I don't necessarily, had I known what I was getting into when I was 20, it's like if I went back to the younger version of me, sometimes I don't know if I'd have done it. But the process of me going through it and ultimately realizing, and again, through my dad and all my coaches and John, it was like, no, what you have to do is empower them. You have to give them space. You have to allow them to fall and trip because that's okay, And ultimately, even though you're obsessed with detail, you have to show humility. You have to recognize that, and let your team know, hey man, when I make a mistake, I want them to know just as much, and I have their back. So I would say in my 20s, as I'm running this first firm, I'm getting lots of help, lots of advice. And this is again when I met John, and it's accelerating, it's exploding. I mean, at the time, my agency ended up growing to about 15, 16 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I was the only sales guy, and I was stressed to the gill. My mother worked with me. I brought her in, and she was my financial manager. She knows numbers like you can't imagine. So in where I was really deficient was, although I'm a spreadsheet guy, I had no knowledge of business accounting. So I was trying to play catch up in my first business. And as a result, yes, we had this software product. We're doing websites. It's in the era where you go win as many awards as you can. You put a paid business announcement in the Journal Star, and you're just going 500 miles an hour because now the internet's just going gangbusters. And so we developed a fairly good reputation. I had a really talented team. But to me, a little bit, it was running so fast off the rails that I couldn't keep a hold of it. And some of it was, and I think this is the other hard part for entrepreneurs, is the discernment of who to listen to. Because, I probably suffered from asking so many people advice that then I didn't know what to decide. And so to some degree, my first business became something that really was not what I wanted. But I loved it and it was great. But a lot of it was it became so much that I ended up, which there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, there are some entrepreneurs that want to grow a business to be 1,000 employees. It's more of a growth business, right? And then there's lifestyle businesses like my mother, like my dad, like my aunts and uncles and my grandparents, where it's, 1, 2, 3 people. It's chop wood, make a good living, do a good job, work within the capacity that you can do. So you have to decide as an owner, what do you want? Do you want to grow your business? Do you want to, stay the size you are, or do you want to get big? There's no wrong answer, but you have to sort of kind of decide that up front, or at least be thinking about that. So to me, the other tenet that, like I said, is, this gentleman, Glenn Frentz, who was in charge of the entrepreneurship at UNL, like I said, he had an ad agency early on. I worked for him when he had a software company. And so for me, he became then one of my mentors that had great clarity because he understood my software aspect of Agelon and he understood the agency part. And he brought me in and he's like, all right, Jay, I'm going to work with you, because I was like, I just don't know what I want to do. I maybe want to sell this. It's just, I don't know, but it's just becoming something that's just a beast. And all I was doing was pushing paper. I wasn't necessarily involved in the creative process. I wasn't getting my hands dirty. And it wasn't that I loved managing, but I'd kind of lost that passion. I wasn't touching any of that stuff anymore. So he said, all right, well, I'm going to put you through a year. This is going to be like boot camp, man. I'm going to beat you up good. I'm going to be giving you blunt razor edge feedback that's going to, kick you sometimes, and just know I'm doing it for the benefit so that you get your financials back into a position where then you can choose what you want to do. You can decide. Right now, you're not in control of your own destiny. So Glenn was the one that really, again, all that wonderful advice I'd gotten, then it became this finite eye. And that's where I learned and started to understand. I'm no CPA, but the value of knowing your numbers, the value of the accounting, and how wonderful not to run away from it, but to truly use that as a tool so that, yes, the numbers don't necessarily only define my success, but it guides me so that, we just got through COVID. Holy smokes. How complicated is that for every business owner? Well, I used that knowledge from Glenn that allowed me then to make better decisions. Like, all right, don't panic. Dad would say, well, panic is a great option, man. Well, no, you got to put your head down and you use numbers. So Glenn then ultimately helped me position my company for acquisition. And in 2007, I believe, so when, essentially I'm about 8 years into the business, I end up selling my company. And as a result of this software product, I had a recurring revenue stream, which again, this is kind of prior to smartphones and everything. That was my value. So without going into a long story, that was a big learning experience. I went through, which I always say every owner should be an employee. And I'd say every employee, if you have a chance to be in high-level leadership, is good, because then the grass is not greener on the other sides. And I was a spoiled brat. I didn't know I was. I needed to get some humble pie. And I went through that process. And I always joke, I tell any owner that sells their business, I'm like, dude, here's the deal. You're going to be there a year and you're gone. So don't even pretend that you're going to stick around, because most of the time, if you're acquired, they're going to want to take your company another direction and you're going to exit. So just know that. Don't even think that you're probably going to stay, because that's just not how it works. So I ended up moving on from that. It was a challenge. It was hard. Even despite my best effort to do things the right way financially, I made some key mistakes in how I structured the acquisition, and it ended up not being very fruitful. And I really, really, really got burned. And a lot of it, was on me. And so again, for a long time I beat myself up, but that's the thing as an owner and as an entrepreneur and anybody. It's like, even if you try to, me being a detail guy, I try to check every single box, and yet I missed an important thing, and it had to do with how I structured the agreement. So sometimes, man, no matter how hard you try, you're going to make a mistake, and you got to give yourself grace. I'm a faith person, and I had to just say, hey, you know what, God, I did the best I could. It is what it is. So then for a period of time, then I helped run another agency as a COO. And this is right before I'd gotten remarried, and my kids aren't born yet. And this was a wonderful experience, because I was brought in to sort of support the CEO. He happens to name Eric Dinger, and he was an idea guy. He just was 500 miles an hour head in the cloud. And I guess for me, my headspace is, again, I credit my dad, I am very block and tackle. My confidence in our company comes from execution. If we are executing, then I can sell it to anybody if we're not doing our job. But on the other hand, I have the ability to think big and dream, but I'm sort of a hybrid. Most CEOs are just wired to just, hey, we're going to dream. So for me, I was helping him take all these ideas and put it into play, execute. I started to manage a team. I started to say, all right, let's learn from maybe how I was cranky pants in my first business, and I was cranky, and I needed to change the way that I operated, where, again, they're not owners. And so all of a sudden, I'm not an owner. And that really helped me. And once in a while, I remember Eric telling me, which was one of the greatest things that I took into my business now, is when I was responsible for business development. And again, do I like sales? No, I can't stand it. But I do love consulting, teaching, guiding. So my sales idea is that if you're coming to my office, I got a big whiteboard. John's probably seen it. It's like, if I'm on my whiteboard doing my stuff, I'm in my like teaching zone. But Eric would say, Jay, don't sell Jay, sell Thought District. Like, oh, you're right. So it was just this simple little thing, but it was a big deal because I was missing out on this. Hey, man, you need to like, and I wasn't trying to be egotistical, but I was missing the point. Yes.
You and your company.
Correct.
Now you were in a different role.
Correct. Absolutely. So needless to say then, it was a great situation. Really, the only thing that was going on is I happened to be the oldest of the whole team, and most of them, they weren't married. And now my wife is pregnant. And I'm like, man, I'm working crazy hours, coming home late at night. And I think maybe that's another thing. Entrepreneurs naturally don't understand balance. When you are fired up, you will literally work insane hours. And like I said, on my first company, I'd work till 9 o'clock at night. Oh, geez, I need to go home. And I'm married, and well, that's not a good idea. But I didn't have those boundaries of knowing when to stop. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you're never done. So I'm like, you know what? Here I am. I'm an older guy. I'm not in my 20s. I get a chance to be a dad. Dude, I need to be around. So because of, I don't get choked up, because of Lydia, I'm like, we need to do this different. So I go to my wife. I'm like, okay, guess what, hon? I'm going to quit my job, and I got all these people wanting me to help them out, and so I am going to start another business. And she's like, what in the Sam Hill are you thinking, Jay? And I'm like, I know, you're going to think I'm nuts. I feel this instinctual pull. Again, it sounds crazy, but I now understand how to do this through all these lessons I've learned so that I can structure this around my family. I'm like, I want to be a dad that's around my kids, period. But I also know that all of a sudden we have social media and the disruption is off the charts. So now we have, it's like I tell people, because I'm old enough, it's like I saw the first level of disruption in the 90s. I mean, it just turned marketing upside down. Oh my gosh, now we have another gigantic disruption. And so, again, I had all these people coming to me, and I had negotiated out of a non-compete. So I had the ability to go do what I wanted to do. So needless to say, I start off, and now we do this different. Now I'm not trying to get a 3,000 square foot office. Now I'm not trying to win all these awards. I literally work out of my house in coffee shops for 3 years. I have very little overhead. I've always been extremely an advocate of, we live in a town of people from SEC and the university and Wesleyan. There's all kinds of talent. I've always benefited. I mean, my two of my greatest employees ever are from UNL. So like, I used part-time talent. I didn't just out of the gate get full-time people. So everything was about, am I making sure that I'm running it by the numbers? Now again, I had a business partner when I started at the same time too. And we were together for about a year. He had a full-time job, and the first name of our company was Turbine Interactive, 13 years ago. And I wasn't always a big fan of the name. He was an engineer, but so needless to say, we went with it. And again, ultimately, he decided he had a good gig in his full-time, so I did an acquisition. So again, I've had so many buyouts, selling stuff, agreements, leases. So I've just, through the school of hard knocks, I've gone through a lot of legal stuff. So at that point, I understood what I was doing. We had a partnership agreement, which again, oh my gosh, if you have a partner, you want to have an absolutely dialed in, buttoned up, here's the recipe of how you go through for the appraisal of the business, so you know how to go do the acquisition, and you know how to, buy each other out. So there's no arguments. So that one was perfect. My first one was a little complicated. So again, I take over. And again, now I'm doing this, and and then the irony is, so my wife, totally not into risk. She'd had all kinds of businesses, but was, had a writing background. She was really good at communications. And so as Trevor was born, about a week and a half after he was born, I had a gal that was kind of running my operations. She resigned. just all of a sudden, no notice. So now Holly is, recently we've got 2 kids that are within 15 months and they're itty bitties. And she's like, you got to be kidding me. So she starts to kind of fill in a little bit. Well, she still works in GenR8 to this day. But again, I think this is weird how God works, is he's like, sometimes when you don't think it's going to work this way, it does. So she became then, which again, I watched family members. My father's parents, my grandparents, were husband-wife partners. They did flooring, carpet installation as a husband-wife for 20 years. And so, I'd ask him, how did you do that? How did you make that work? And they had this really, really great relationship and how they worked together as business partners. I had other clients that did the same thing. So it was like, okay, then we talk about boundaries. So Holly and I have a rule where we get home at 5:30. Done. No talk to work unless we both say, hey, is it okay? Do we need to talk about something? But then it was like, no matter what, I stopped. Now, what I did in those early days is I was like, all right, now that I can do this, I would come home, I would be with the kids, I'd be with Holly, and then when everybody went to bed, I'd go down and work till 1 or 2 in the morning. And I did that probably 3 or 4 days a week. But like when I tell dads, it's like, it's what you do. It's like, it was about my family now. Now I had clarity of purpose. I knew exactly why I was doing it. And everything was anchored around my passion for making sure clients were not wasting money in marketing, and that I was, being there for my family. I tell people, it's like, I went from living to work to working to live. That doesn't mean I'm not passionate about my work, but my entire why. Like when I do my video interviews, and I interview entrepreneurs all the time, that's my number one question I ask. And it happens to be the most popular video that's ever watched, is I say, why do you do this? And they kind of think, and then they go on to this long diatribe like I am, and then they find it's like, yeah, you have to have a strong why. You have to have conviction, because you're going to face times where there is like, this sucks. Why would I want to be an owner? So you have to have this. So for me, in those times where I had to work crazy, insane hours, and I was totally tired and sleep, it didn't matter, because I was able to come home and hang with my kids and help my wife out. So now to come kind of to the GenR8 side. How am I on time? Okay. So to come full circle with GenR8, essentially now we've had the business for about 6 years, and people kept thinking either we were turbine flats or we built turbines. And I'm like, okay, this is dumb. We need to follow our own advice. Because again, at this point, I'm kind of a business coach trying to help people name their companies, still do branding. I'm still doing that, but fitting it into more what I'd say project-based initiatives. But my passion was, I really wanted to help people make good decisions so that the marketing, because I always watched from the day one with websites, data was there. And all these, in the era that I started, to do market research, you had to do this comprehensive thing, and it took months to be able to gather information. And so we used to do surveys and things like that. But it was like, man, I can't wait till data is to a point where, again, going to the tech side, numbers make decisions. So we decided, and I was telling my parents last night, I have a little Sharpie sketch of our light bulb, a little Edison bulb, and my wife came up with a name because we asked ourselves, what do we want to do? And it was, I want to help people generate leads and referrals. It goes back to kind of clear. My job is to help companies actually get benefit out of marketing. Now, there's nothing wrong with awareness and PR and stuff, but I'm like, you know what? And then it was like, hey, what are the clients I like to work with? Well, it was small business. It's the DNA. It's the thing I grew up around. Dealing with giant companies that had 5,000 employees, which I dealt with in the past, not very fun. Hey, some people enjoy that. That was not our jam. So to me, it was like, I know, and I felt, and I'd gone through so much as an owner that I understood that hustle. I understood that tussle, whether an owner had been around for 30 years or 6 months. We had the same, and you could look an owner in the eye and say, yeah, it's hard meeting payroll sometimes, isn't it? And they're like, yeah, it is. So there was this common language that had. So for me, it wasn't so much about industry. It had to do with mentality and size, because I dealt with every industry imaginable. So there was that, what do I want and what do I not want, which is what I tell my clients. Well, I want Small businesses, I want to deal with owners, and I need them to be in a headspace that they need someone to coach them. The second part was by us wanting to generate leads. I mean, you used to be able to charge $10,000 for a website. Those days were gone. So we were starving. All of a sudden, here I start this business 6 years in, and, we're in the poor farm. Okay, now, this gets back to that, is you have to constantly be willing to change and try to at least adapt as quickly as you can. If you don't, you will go away. So I tell people, like, you're asking me, what was my key to success? I mean, I tried to acknowledge my mistakes, and I survived. I mean, the number of agencies that are gone since I started there's probably 30 that are gone. So I've just hung around, right? Now we've done good work, but we've just survived. So for us, now we had a mission, and we knew what we wanted and knew we were about. Now, changing a name is huge. That's crazy. So we had to completely restart this whole, I think when I spoke here like 10 years ago, I was Turbine then. So needless to say, that was the smartest decision I ever made. We switched from a model of 80 to 90% was project-based. Now remember, my old business had recurring. 30% of my revenue came in every single month. I could sleep and it would come in. Here I said, you know what? Everybody wants, the old days of marketing was to even have a seat at the table, you had to spend $2 or $3 grand a month. And if you didn't have that much cash, I couldn't help them. Well, because of the nature of how social media and Google advertising works, if you knew the numbers and knew how to do it, I could work at a fraction of the cost and still be profitable. So again, number one thing Glenn said, run it, revenue per employee, Jay, period. You want to know your profits? So I knew exactly my revenue per employee. I think the first time was like 30,000. Mine is now over 100. Now all it is just discipline. It's just knowing that like you fit within that compartment, but I know how much money I want to make per employee. Otherwise, again, things going to run off the rails. So I always kept my overhead really lean. So I said, you know what? We're going to flip this. I didn't know how far, but I'm like, I want to go 80-20, not 20-80 in recurring. Now, the other thing I believed in, and I would say Glenn would think I was nuts when I started this, is I wanted to do it with no contract. I had the data, and I said, hey, you come to me, we'll spend hundreds of dollars a month with me, with the AdWords. I don't mark up the stuff. We're going to develop a system that's going to help you get leads and referrals. And we're going to use the data to evaluate it. I have skin in the game with you, owner. You and I are mano-a-mano. So it would be really silly for me to start having you spend too much because you're going to quit. So I made myself vulnerable. Smartest thing I ever did. Boom, no contract. So now, to this day, I have anywhere at one given time 30 to 35 small businesses that I help every month that pay monthly. That could quit any time, frankly. And sometimes that's hard. I mean, sometimes you just lose. But because of that mentality, we've always positioned ourselves in that we put our money where our mouth is. And because we are a student of the game with the data, because we're constantly okay with change, it created a much more stable business model. And as a result, yeah, then I was able to like make decisions. And even to this day, COVID has changed some stuff too. Right now there's more volatility. So Holly and I are going through some additional evolutionary things. The other part that changed everything was my team. I absolutely am fascinated by Gen Z. Every generation has their slackers, but I had the privilege of finding 3 ladies 6 and 7 years ago that started working for me. Those first 5-6 years, we had we'd have people stay and come and it was good, but we couldn't quite get that retention, and that's hard. So the other part of a business is you have employees, it is so hard to retain people. And so going back to the lessons I learned, it's like, all right, now again, I'm a dad now, so I think that maybe helped me a little bit, is I'm like, a lot of them were young enough to be my kids. And I'm like, you know what? They are insane at problem solving. One of the gals that does my video, she started editing video when she was 13 years old. I mean, my son right now started doing stop motion animation Legos when he was 8. It's a different time. So she was in high school. I brought her in. I'm like, you have the maturity of a 30-year-old. This is insane. How she needed to be mentored. So I was like, you know what? And this is what I tell these other owners. give them a seat at the adult table. That's what I did. I'm like, you guys are awesome. Give them client exposure. You know, sometimes they're going to struggle, but allow them to be right there. Now, not everybody is built that way, but they were. And by golly, gosh darn it, they just crushed it. And they are fundamentally why I can sleep at night, why my wife and I can go on vacation, and because they are so self-managed that they come to me. And that's the other thing as an owner is if an employee comes to you and says, hey, that's dumb. Why do you need to fix that, Jay? Well, in my 20s, I'm like, no, I think this is the right way. Nope. Caitlin comes to me, and mind you, she's 19 years old. She says, would you stop zooming in on the video? It screws up the pixelation, and I can't knock out the green screen. And she's a little blunt, and I'm like, fair enough, I will do that. I'm like, I appreciate that. Well, I've proven to her that I'm not above reproach. I'm willing to listen to someone, regardless of age, to tell me what I need to do. But the reality is then they would be like, hey, we're not doing this. We need to improve this. I'd be like, awesome. So to some degree, I kind of then developed a mentality of, hey, here's the rails. We all are trying to run down this road, and here's the goal we're trying to hit. I don't care anymore how we get there. You know, owners tend to get obsessed, and it's not saying we've developed process over time, but we're so synergized that I let them take the process I created and run with it. Tell me how we do better. Like the girls right now, we're redoing our website. I am barely telling us what to do. And I'm the owner, right? My wife obviously works, but she kind of, wants me to be that. Well, I'm like, here's some things to think about. But I'm like, you guys know us. Make us great. So again, it's like checking that ego, letting yourself not feel like you have to be right. Like I tell my kids, it's more about doing it right, not being right. I don't care anymore about that. I just want to empower them. And then here's the other thing, is the creative industry is radically like lots of criticism. I mean, people can say things to you that will cut you and you will just want to go home and quit. And so with each of my youngins, they had these moments where clients just cut them below the legs. And I would be like, hey, client, I feel you. Validation, as my dad would say, validation, I understand where you come from. And I said, I know you don't like what we did, but here's the deal. I'm not going to charge you, and I guarantee you if you give them a chance, they'll get there. I promise. Because they are relentless. They'd come to me, and they're, a couple of them were crying. They didn't want, I'm like, hey, man, I can't get you back in the saddle, but I'm telling you, here's your, getting kicked in the teeth. And then, of course, they got through it. And it was like, I just wanted to throw a parade because I knew if I had their back, because here was the deal. They worked harder than anybody. They were willing to run through a brick wall through me, which again, this is how I kind of accidentally got into coaching. It was like, oh my gosh. So I'm like, if you go to the hilt and somebody hates what you do, I got your back. That doesn't mean we still have to deal with the client because they pay our salary. But if someone is just treating you like garbage, I will defend you. I didn't do a good job of that before. Well, then that's how I built loyalty. I paid them good. I gave them benefits. I mean, this gal is in college. She has health insurance, dental, and vision. Okay? I mean, I have just relentlessly tried to do a good job of taking care of them. And most importantly, they want to be empowered so they can own it. Now, I understand not everybody's cut that way. But by golly, if you find someone that has that, you do everything you can as an owner to get the heck out of the way and let them be awesome.
So interesting that you talk about this, Jason, because I am going to a conference at the Engler Center for Entrepreneurship. It's on East Campus. So all of the things that you've talked about, like rethinking things, being innovative, all of the things that they're talking about as an educator, how we can empower our students. And all those things about you give them the option, you let them make the choices. So very much in the entrepreneurial spirit of not only your business, but how we can educate the young people. And the reason why they have this seminar or this conference is so that they are developing the young entrepreneurs.
Yes. Yes, and what people have to realize, like I tell them, it's like, I grew up where I'd come home at dark. It was a different era. There was no internet. I kind of lived in a more peaceful time, pre 9/11. I mean, there was always things, but it was just, these kids are growing up with cyberbullying. I mean, I'd say the difference between millennial and Gen Z, and again, I have to do generational analysis, so I'm not at all trying to do a broad brushstroke, but millennials were more around when social media was puppy dogs and rainbows. Gen Z has been around with the evils of social media, which again, if you were to ask me, are there things I like about? Absolutely not. I mean, with every technology, unfortunately, and innovation, there's use and abuse. So I am like radically concerned about responsible use and understanding. I mean, even with my kids, I'm not just going to give them unlimited access just to do whatever you want. Dude, that's irresponsible. You have to teach them to make sure that they use this correctly. But that generation fundamentally they have had to grow faster. They've grown up with school shootings. They're growing up with a very, very different environment. So for them, they have for many have a natural maturity that they're just like, hey, don't treat me like a kid. And it gives me so much joy to see that youth do that. And again, so if you were to say, what's my favorite part of my job now? That's part of it. I mean, I would say in my first business, I hated managing because it just seemed like nobody seemed to understand the standard that I had. And honestly, that was on me. With them, no, they set the standard. And again, it goes back to, you got to have the right people. I mean, my wife is incredible. Like, she is so good. She's the yin to my yang. You know, I do video shooting. Caitlin does all the editing. I'm doing graphic design some, but I delegate to Jillian. I'll still do my logos. And then Holly helps with, email marketing and the social media and the online advertising. So again, that's the other thing as an owner, is you have to recognize, what am I good at and what am I not? Dad would always say, surround yourself with people that know things you don't. So you have to be cognizant. That doesn't mean as an owner, I want to understand. I mean, fortunately for me, I built sites. I was in the code. I did that stuff. I still do graphic design. So I have an appreciation. I do once in a while edit videos only to stay sharp so that I'm a better mentor, so that I haven't completely lost touch. But there is this very fine line where, as an owner, if all of a sudden you go off the trail, then you're working 75 hours a week again. So I keep this sort of within this very narrow lane that allows me so that I'm still a credible person to mentor, that I still understand, but knowing Chelsea's built almost 300 sites in WordPress. She knows that inside, outwards, forwards, and backwards. So for crying out loud, yes, principle, like Dad and I were talking about this last night, as he went in there was a point where he didn't do the coding anymore. So he understood the principles, but he wasn't doing the work. I'm in the same boat now. But there is just this necessity that you don't want to, as an owner, get so disjointed that you forget what it's like to be the employee. So for me, having my failed acquisition, getting my butt handed to me, having to go through that then made me realize I can never forget what it's like to be there. So that's always, I try to keep that in my mind, is that I think, and it's just being a good human being, treating them the way that they want to be treated. So again, I'm talking so much about my team, but that youth identifies blind spots. Somebody says, I want to be on TikTok. Caitlin will go, yeah, that doesn't work. Hey, they need to be on Twitter. She's like, no, that's dumb. Well, they know. They know the nuance of whether or not it's going to work or not. So of course I should listen to them. I mean, now they're in their 20s and mid-20s, so they're phenomenally knowledgeable. So that's, again, it goes back to that. Just because it's cool doesn't mean we should do it. We need to do it if it's effective. Now, that obviously doesn't mean we don't look at it. We're always looking. I mean, I'm dealing with AI right now. That's like the flavor of the month. And that's going to be changing everything. Well, my industry is scared like crazy. They're afraid it's going to eliminate copywriters. It can eliminate design. Well, I don't see it that way. I see it as, you know what? There is still, as I've been experimenting with all the tools, there's still a human touch that's required. It's that quote, quote, last 5%. So yeah, maybe I can more generate a raw logo and then take it and do spit and polish on it. Okay, that just saved me time. We're generating blogs now. We need to generate content for Google. Hey, now we wordsmith and put a personal spin on it. Now we've just cut the time to do a blog in half. Yes. So again, I think that's the other thing. It's a Peter Drucker quote, which I don't remember, is like an entrepreneur finds change and seizes it as an opportunity. Now, I will fully admit that COVID has been probably it has been the most complicated thing I've ever navigated in my career. It has been so hard. And a lot of it has to do with just the kind of the hangover of where the business owner's headspace is at. Some industries struggle more than others. You know, we're getting in and out. So like for me right now, I just have less at bats. I don't have as many. Before COVID, we were just cruising, you know? And now it's like, you know, I've been through economic changes. I was through 2008. I went through the 99 bubble. So I know, but it is like nothing I've ever seen. But again, I go back to that lesson I learned from Glenn is use the numbers, watch your numbers. So for me, whenever I'm stressed, whenever I'm like, all right, I got to make magic happen this month. What I got to fit in the bag? I watch my percentage of recurring like a hawk. I have this super spreadsheet that runs my business now. So that is what's allowed me to like actually sleep at night, because if I was not running my numbers, I don't think we'd made it. But we pared down where we needed to. We tried to identify change, and it's still hard. I'll fully admit it's not easy right now. But again, I think as owners, we have to help each other, and then, like I said, constantly try to look at ways to innovate. Because no matter what, no matter where there's something that's struggling, there's always going to be an opportunity. You just have to find it.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
So we have come up to our time. I know you probably have questions. Does anybody have a few questions for Jason?
I covered a lot.
Thank you so much for coming
You bet.
and sharing your story. Ray has sent out an email about Graham had been in the hospital and he's home. We have a get well card. It'll be at Ray's desk if you want to sign that, and then we will get that to Graham. He's doing well. He's doing great. Yes. Yep. So if we can give a round of applause to Jason.
Thank you.